The following program is made possible by supporters and friends of Biblical Foundations Academy International.
Previously on Time Will Tell.
What they decided to do is to put within the walls of this church their own clock that would allow for them to declare the sacred times according to the church.
The main purpose of this sun clock was to determine the spring equinox so as to declare the Easter celebration with pinpoint accuracy.
I need some answers. Therefore, I appeal to Caesar, or to Pontifex Maximus, or to the Pope. Whoever it is that can give me some answers. Now, I know it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to start the process and see at least if I can get to St. Peter's Square, somehow get in there and maybe get close enough just to holler a question or two to the man called the Pope.
As advised by my two friends, the priest and the nun, I arrived early and set up camp right by the expected route of the Popemobile. The dignitaries started arriving dressed in their Sunday best. As the crowds grew larger, the security detail became more visible and active.
Well, I'm here for my meeting with the Pope. Looks like it's going to be me and several other people, but I'm looking forward to meeting him. This is going to be quite the experience. Got people all around me. But I have to say, I sure got a good seat right by the spot where he's going to come, right on the edge.
Just when I was getting a little tired and quite thirsty after 2 hours in the sun, I heard what sounded like angels singing the Father's name. Was I hallucinating?
Well, according to the Pope's clock, he's late. He's supposed to be here at 10:30. I'm not sure. Maybe he's on a different time. He's got to be here pretty soon.
10:30.
The clock says it's 1:45.
Then at that moment, he made his fashionably late grand entrance.
Well, folks, the Pope is on his way in. He's a little late, but it doesn't look like he's coming by here. He's supposed to come by here. We'll see.
I wanted to shout out that he was going the wrong way, but I restrained myself. Wait a minute. I wondered if he knew I was there. I made an appointment and had a ticket. The next thing I knew, a Swiss guard came and stood directly in front of me as more people started closing in on my spot. I knew then that it could get ugly.
Well, I'm here. We're going to be seeing the Pope here in just a second. I'm surrounded with a lot of people.
And just like that, he was out of earshot. Besides, my cheat sheet with questions got trampled under the feet of zealous Pope fans. I figured I'd have to wait until after the sermon to ask my questions. I prepared myself to be ready for the next onslaught. After assessing the damage, I noticed that I had my own personal Swiss guard standing in front of me and nowhere else along the barrier. Maybe they were profiling zealous Methodists that day. I thought about asking him my questions, but realized he wasn't in a talkative mood.
Well, here we are. He's getting seated. I'm standing here with my friends and the Swiss guard right behind me. Pope's getting ready to speak, and after that, hopefully we'll have our.
I settled in for what was shaping up to be a long, hot day in the sun, listening to the Pope sing, pray, and preach in 7 different languages. It was interesting listening to the Bible being read in these foreign languages to see what I could pick up. Though I have to admit, I was more interested in why there was a dragon and an eagle under the keys than trying to understand Latin and Italian. It was cool when I did understand something like at the end of this section when the Pope ended with,
Muchas gracias.
It didn't take long for the folks behind me to check out for the day. I also considered taking a nap until the next reader came up and I heard two words that sounded familiar.
Situado perto de Jerusalém, à distância de uma caminhada sábado, e foram para Jerusalém.
Jerusalem and Sabbath? Now he had my attention. I wondered what passage he was preaching from. I was straining to pick up any other clues and hoping that English was coming soon.
Most Holy Father, the English-speaking visitors and pilgrims are happy to have this occasion to express to you their sentiments of respect and esteem, and to assure you of their prayers for your ministry as the successor of Peter. Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day journey away. And when they had entered, they went to the upper room where they were staying, Peter and John, and James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus and Simon Zealot, and Judas the son of James. All these, with one accord, devoted themselves to prayer, together with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. The word of the Lord.
Dear brothers and sisters, in our continuing catechism on Christian prayer, we now begin a new chapter on prayer in the Acts of the Apostles and the letters of St. Paul. Today I wish to speak of the figure of Mary, who with the apostles in the upper room prayerfully awaits the gift of the Holy Spirit. In all the events of her life, from the Annunciation to the cross to Pentecost, Mary is presented by St. Luke as a woman of recollected prayer and meditation on the mystery of God's saving plan in Christ. In the upper room we see Mary's privileged place in the church, of which she is the example and outstanding model in faith and charity. As the Mother of God and Mother of the Church, Mary plays in and with the Church at every decisive moment of salvation history. Let us entrust to her every moment of our own lives, and let her teach us the need for prayer, so that in loving union with her Son, we may implore the outpouring of the Holy Spirit and the spread of the gospel to all the ends of the earth. Et Spiritus Sanctus.
I was stunned. The Pope chose to preach from our passage in Acts chapter 1, 12 to 14 about the upper room. I thought he was supposed to preach from the Psalms or some catechism or something. As the patriarchs, cardinals, and bishops lined up to bow and kiss the Pope's ring, a few of them decided to greet their people rather than stay for the afterglow.
He's our patriarch. His name is Mar Emanuel Delhi. He's our patriarch from Middle East.
While I watched people wait in line for the blessing of the Pope, I thought about the Christian upper room back in Jerusalem that is connected to the clock church dedicated to Mary, but disconnected from its historical and biblical roots. I thought about the Jews who gathered at the temple and witnessed the fire that fell from heaven versus the church-created symbolic fire we see today. As the Pope was saying his goodbyes and getting into his German-made Pope-mobile, I had staked out a great spot right next to the barrier, and this time there was no Swiss guard to block my access. Just when he was getting close, somebody yelled, the drums started to play, and he exited stage right. And just like that, it was over. As I stood in silence, I focused on the ancient obelisk directly in front of the Pope's empty chair where he sits as successor to Peter. It was time for me to share my conclusions and give my response as a Methodist pastor. I may be a former Methodist after this video comes out. On Saturday, September 26, 1586, Pope Sixtus dedicated this obelisk after it was moved from the grounds of Nero's circus and had these Latin words etched into the ancient stone clock. Christ is the victor. Christ is king. Christ is the ruler. May Christ defend his people from all evil. He also left the original words carved farther up the obelisk that caused me to take a second look. Divine Augustus and Divine Tiberius. Was it a coincidence that Sixtus picked the Sabbath and the day of a full moon to erect his sun clock, when according to the Jewish calendar it was the first day of the holiday of the Feast of Booths? The church has removed the physical sighting of the moon from their sacred time calculations, and yet God's clock that followed me from Israel is still a witness in the sky, even when the church ignores its presence. Now it was time for my response to Pope Benedict and all of those, past and present, who sit in this man-ordained chair as Pontifex Maximus.
I'm declaring today that Yehovah Hu Elohim, Yehovah Avinu, only Yehovah is our Father. I declare this today in St. Peter's Square amongst people singing and celebrating Mass. Regardless of all of that, they need to know the truth. And the truth is there is only one God, and there's only one Holy Father, and his name is Yehovah.
The police showed up a minute too late to silence me. On my way out, I sounded the shofar as a warning for the Pope and his people to wake up. My visit to Temple Vatican highlighted the fact that the Church has conveniently picked what parts of biblical truth to keep and what aspects to either adjust or simply burn in the fires of forgetfulness and or anti-Semitism. This is certainly the case regarding God's time versus church sacred time. Listening to the Pope make Mary the focus of Pentecost is just one example of this approach. This huge painting in the Vatican Temple depicts Mary as being presented by the high priest at the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. This is at best wishful thinking. I do not want to say at worst what it could mean. At least they left the Hebrew name on the mitre of the high priest, as it also appears on the head of an angel at the tomb of Pope Clement XIII at the Vatican Temple. Does she look familiar to anyone else? Anyway, they also were nice enough not to move the fanciful event to the new Mount Zion and the upper room. This picture motivated me to get back to Jerusalem to finish piecing together the puzzle. But first, I had some unfinished business back amongst the ruins of ancient Rome. This arch is less than 100 yards from the Arch of Constantine and is 200 plus years older. It stands in what was called the sacred way that all triumphant generals of the Roman army would have their triumphant entry showing off their spoils of war. The inscription is another example of how in Rome, making a man divine after his death was as simple as carving it into stone. The Roman Senate and people dedicate this to the divine Titus Vespasianus Augustus, son of the divine Vespasian. On the other side, Pope Pius VII had the ruined arch restored and made sure to give himself honor as none other than Pontifex Maximus, and he added, in the year of his sacred rulership, just to make sure he established his authority and to stick his chest out. The inside of this arch is the actual reason I needed to come back here. This is a picture carved into stone of what Titus brought back to Rome after destroying the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. There are 3 items from the temple that can be clearly seen: the 7-branch golden menorah, the table of showbread, and the 2 silver trumpets. This is not a fairy tale. It is real history. Titus destroyed most of the temple in Jerusalem and kept a few things for Rome. Sound familiar? I was able to sneak under the arch and do a quick video with my tripod before you-know-who showed up and kicked me out.
Well, I could spend all day here. Unfortunately, I don't have time. But what we have behind me is a picture etched in stone that unfortunately is a picture of where we're at today. Unfortunately, as I look at this picture, I think about where we're at today regarding time. Many organizations have taken some portion of that which started on the Temple Mount Jerusalem, and then removed it and made it into their own agenda. This is exactly the case regarding time. They have decided they don't want God's will, God's way, God's word. They simply want their way, their will, and their word for their agenda. This is what Titus did then, and this is what's happening today regarding time.
Before leaving ancient Rome, I decided to do a quick blow of the shofar before getting kicked out again. Within days after my visit with Pope Benedict, and after making proclamations at both the obelisk in St. Peter's Square and at the Temple of Ancient Rome, something major happened. Pope Benedict reportedly decided, while on his papal visit to Mexico, that he would be stepping down within the year. On February 11, 2013, he shocked the world by renouncing his ministry. And at the same time, lightning struck Temple Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica, that woke up Catholics around the world. On February 28, he walked away from the seat of power, so it seemed. I found it curious that his last act as Pope was to fly in an Italian government helicopter over the very spot in ancient Rome where the arches of Titus and Constantine stand. Was this strategic symbolism or just another coincidence? Only time will tell. As I was leaving Rome, my taxi driver drove past the obelisk that is in front of the presidential palace. I had learned more than I wanted to about these clocks that were erected to track the sun and tell time for the church. As I watched the sunrise, I knew what was waiting on the horizon for me the next day. It was time to leave the roots in Rome and get back to the sun-grown tree of tradition that was firmly planted in Jerusalem. Now that I had made it back to the Church of Conflict, or officially the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, I guess I should tell you why this place is connected to Rome. In 135 AD, the evil Roman Emperor Hadrian built a temple to Venus on this very spot. Need I say more? Emperor Constantine and his mother Helena took it from there. Constantine built the church, and Helena claims to have found the original cross of the crucifixion. As I sat out next to the foundations of the original pillars of the church, I decided it was time to answer the question about Constantine's beliefs. Was he a Christian emperor pacifying pagans, or a pagan emperor trying to please Christians? It was time to talk to Ronnie again. One of the most fascinating things Ronnie has in his shop is a safe that houses ancient coins that span thousands of years. He has shown me a coin from 440 BC that was one of the first ever minted in the ancient world. But that is not what I wanted to see on this visit. I needed for him to look for coins minted by Constantine the Great to see if there might be any clues about his faith. If you want to know about what a man believes in, look at how he deals with his money.
3 coins, small bronze coins, which were in circulation, minted by the authority of Constantine the Great, and in circulation in the time of Constantine the Great. The first coin, and I especially put out the first coin, which is a very general coin, goddess one side, no interest, nothing to do with Christianity or whatever.
You said a goddess on the one side. So
yes, a goddess one side, written on it Verbsroma. And the important part is the other side of the coin. There is a she-wolf with Romulus and Romulus feeding from the she-wolf, which is the symbol of Rome. So we have Caesar, who adopted Christianity, maybe because his mother, maybe not, and a completely non-Christian idea at the other side. Then we have a coin of Helena, written on it Helena, at the reverse, some titles. Nice, he put his mother on the coin. Nothing to do with Christianity. And the other side would have one of the goddesses of that period with a lot of titles around and written where it was minted. Nothing to do. So you have to decide, is there any connection between these coins and Christianity? And this is the Caesar and his mother who introduced, adopted Christianity, but it took time.
Have you yet asked yourself the question why I keep coming back to the Constantine family in this Christian Time episode? It has to do with much more than arches, churches, and coins. Constantine, the great emperor and best friend to both pagans and Christians, established a new perspective on God's clock and calendar for his subjects. Oh, and by the way, his perspective is in direct conflict with the biblical reckoning of time. Imagine that. He started his calendar reform one day at a time in 321 AD by simply using his authority as Caesar to lay down the law of when his subjects could lay down. Literally. He changed the Sabbath day of rest from the biblical seventh day to the venerable day of the sun. You know, Sunday. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. Edict of Constantine, 321. 43 years later, the Catholic Church made sure there was no confusion that what began as a pagan ordinance ended as a Christian practice. Christians shall not Judaize and be idle on Saturday, the Sabbath, but shall work on that day. But the Lord's day they shall especially honor, and as being Christians, shall, if possible, do no work on that day. If, however, they are found Judaizing, they shall be shut out from Christ. Council of Laodicea, 364 AD. Oh, I guess I should let you hear what Ronnie said regarding that particular year in history.
When Julianus, who was in 364, readopted legally for the Roman Empire the worshipping of many gods.
Just when I was almost ready to go into Constantine's church to address his love affair with the sun and aversion to God's clock and calendar, the bells started ringing and it looked like something was brewing again. I held my ground and braced for what was coming. The police began clearing folks out of the way, but must have figured I was on official business, so they let me stay inside the restricted area right there with my tripod and one-man camera crew. When these guys came out, I took it as a sign that I should not go into another dark building that was built on the foundations of a Roman temple, but rather I should follow the cross. Okay, I confess. I needed a way to end this episode before getting too close to the fire regarding the connection between Methodist sacred time and Roman sun worship, and these guys provided a way of escape. Sort of. I joined in the procession and actually felt quite comfortable until I realized I was following a cross and a bunch of guys with black hoods into a dark tunnel. Were they trying to tell me something by waving? It seemed like a good opportunity to leave the procession at that point.
Greetings, my friend. Greetings.
The Armenians actually led me to a familiar street in the old city. I was happy, okay, relieved to see my Israeli military friends with the clock church tower in the background. I knew it was time to get back to where this whole Christian journey began in order to close the gap. Placing Arabic letters on only one side of a church clock tower still puzzled me. However, building a church far away from the Jewish temple started making much more strategic sense, especially when the church wanted to forget about the when and the where of Pentecost/Shavuot and instead shifted the focus to the who and the what. The why question then becomes unimportant, unless you're a guy like me. Now I understood the Pope's sermon in Rome when he said, "In the upper room, we see Mary's privileged place in the church, of which she is the exemplar and outstanding model in faith and charity." Down in the basement, right behind Mary's crypt, is a picture that best affirms the Pope's point. Mary is depicted as the central figure of Pentecost. What happened to Peter sitting in the chair of authority? I also witnessed the application of his charge to the world that, quote, as Mother of God and Mother of the Church, Mary prays in and with the church at every decisive moment of salvation history. Let us entrust to her every moment of our lives, unquote. As I was leaving Mary's church, I noticed something that seemed out of place. Hebrew letters on a stained glass window in a church. A German tourist just happened to show up to boast that the window was made in his city of Cologne, Germany. Even though he couldn't read it, he did offer his explanation of the church, sort of. As I read the Hebrew letters on the window, they were from Genesis chapter 1, telling about God's reckoning of time and leading me to start the journey of discovery regarding the Jewish understanding of God's clock. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Join me in the next episode as we continue the process of discovery about God's clock from the Jewish perspective. Take the journey with me from the place of the first Passover at the Jordan River to the first place God said his name at ancient Shiloh. Dig with me into the soil of the Temple Mount and venture beneath the ancient walls of the old city of Jerusalem. This is only a small sampling of the many people, places, and things I encounter as we delve deeper into the Time Will Tell series.
Please remember, Biblical Foundations Academy International depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you.